The October sun spilled amber light across the old stone facade of Ashton Falls University. Inside Building C, the lecture hall hummed with quiet anticipation. Students shuffled in with paper cups of coffee, laptop lids snapping open, pens clicking against notepads. Outside, a swirl of gold and red maple leaves chased one another down the brick path, carried by the crisp Virginia wind. Dr. Naomi Carter stood at the podium, not reading from notes, but speaking in that measured, deliberate way that made people lean in without realizing it. At 50, she carried herself with a kind of unshakable calm, chin level, eyes steady, voice low enough to make you want to lean closer, but never so soft you'd miss a word. Her topic that morning, justice when the law turns against the people. It was the kind of subject that drew debate in this hall, some students eager to argue, others just looking for extra credit. Naomi, dressed in a tailored navy blazer, spoke as if she'd seen the edges of that statement up close. Justice, she said, isn't only measured by the cases we win, it's also measured by who we choose not to protect. A ripple moved through the room. Sophie Grant, a junior political science major in the third row, tapped her phone's record button without thinking. Something about the way Naomi said it made her pulse quicken. Behind Naomi on the desk sat a slim, weathered leather briefcase, the kind you didn't see much anymore. The lock was coated, 3 small brass dials that caught the light when she moved. She never touched it. Once, between points, her eyes flicked toward it, just for a heartbeat, before returning to the students. Sometimes, Naomi continued, the truth has to be collected before it's revealed. Sophie tilted her head at the choice of words, thumb hovering over the screen, and then the doors slammed open. The sound bounced off the tiered walls. Conversations cut off. 2 men in uniform filled the doorway. The one in front, broad-shouldered, red in the face, marched in like he owned the place. Officer Mark Reddick's boots hit the tile in sharp, deliberate strides. Behind him, Officer Evan Morales followed, leaner, younger, his gaze darting between his partner and the room. "Dr. Naomi Carter," Reddick barked, voice cutting through the stillness. "You are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." A collective gasp broke from the rows of students. Coffee cups froze halfway to mouths. Sophie felt her phone slip slightly in her grip. "What?" someone near the back muttered. "You've got the wrong person," another called. Naomi didn't flinch. She turned her head toward the officers, expression unreadable, as if she'd been expecting something. "Hands behind your back," Reddick ordered, already reaching for the cuffs on his belt. She didn't argue. Slowly, deliberately, Naomi set the remote control for the projector on the desk, stepped away from the podium, and clasped her hands at the base of her spine. The metal clicked shut around her wrists. "You think this is some kind of joke?" Reddick muttered, tightening the cuffs more than necessary. "We'll see if you're still smug at county." From the desk, Morales reached for the leather briefcase. Sophie's brow furrowed. That case hadn't moved all morning. Naomi had barely looked at it, let alone opened it. Morales spun the dials, 3 quick clicks, and lifted the latch. Inside, on top of neatly stacked folders, sat a small black pouch. He unzipped it and tipped it open toward the class. A clear plastic bag of white powder slid into view. "Bingo!" Morales announced, his voice louder than it needed to be. The room erupted. "That wasn't there 10 minutes ago," someone shouted. "She didn't even touch that bag." Sophie's voice cracked as she stood halfway from her seat. Reddick turned on her. "Sit down before you make this worse." Sophie stayed on her feet, phone aimed squarely at the officers. "I'm streaming this live, the whole thing." Reddick's jaw twitched. "She's not walking out of here," he growled to Morales. Naomi's gaze swept the room once, lingering a fraction of a second on Sophie. No fear, no surprise, just something else. They marched her up the aisle between the rows of stunned students. Someone's pen clattered to the floor. A girl in the corner covered her mouth with both hands. Sophie's camera followed the slow, steady movement until Naomi reached the door. And there, for a breath, Naomi met Sophie's eyes again. A faint narrowing, almost like acknowledgement. Not a plea, not a warning. Just a mark in time. Then she was gone, the sound of Reddick's boots and the scrape of the door closing swallowing the last of the morning's lecture. The hallway outside smelled faintly of floor polish and autumn air drifting through the cracked window at the end. Students spilled out of nearby classrooms, some craning their necks to see, others pulling out their phones as if on reflex. Reddick kept his grip on Naomi's arm firm, steering her toward the stairwell. "Move," he said under his breath. Morales followed, the black pouch now sealed inside an evidence bag. His jaw was tight, but his eyes flicked over the people gathering in doorways. Whispers followed them down the steps. "She's a professor," a voice said. "No, she's more than that. I've seen her on TV." "What's going on?" Naomi stayed silent. The cuffs bit into her skin, but her stride never faltered. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the quad. Reddick's cruiser sat at the curb, its blue and white paint gleaming under the pale sun. As they approached, Sophie emerged from the building's side entrance, holding her phone aloft. She kept pace on the sidewalk, narrating under her breath. "They're putting her in the back now. This is Dr. Naomi Carter, guest lecturer, not some dealer, and they're planting evidence. Look at this. Look at her." Reddick shot her a glare. "Back off." Sophie didn't move. "The internet's already watching." Naomi's head turned slightly, just enough to catch Sophie in the corner of her eye. Again, that unreadable look. Then she ducked into the back seat as Reddick's hand pressed the crown of her head down. The door slammed. Inside the cruiser, the air was warmer, carrying the faint smell of vinyl and stale coffee. Morales slid into the passenger seat, avoiding Naomi's gaze. Reddick started the engine, the radio crackling with background chatter from other units. From behind the plexiglass divider, Naomi's voice came low and even. "Every camera saw you." Reddick didn't answer. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. Morales glanced sideways at him but said nothing. They pulled away from the curb. Through the window, Naomi watched the campus recede. The library steps, the old oak by the student union, Sophie still standing there with her phone pointed after them. The image grew smaller, then vanished behind a bend in the road. The ride to Precinct 7 took less than 10 minutes, but each stoplight seemed to stretch. At one, a group of pedestrians glanced at the back seat, recognizing Naomi, their faces shifting from curiosity to shock. The hum of the cruiser's engine filled the silence. At the station, Reddick guided her out, ignoring the handful of reporters lingering by the entrance. Questions flew. "What are the charges?" "Is it true she's a federal witness?" But Reddick kept his head down, moving her through the doors into the cool, fluorescent-lit lobby. The desk clerk looked up, startled. Charge?" "Possession with intent," Reddick said shortly, sliding the evidence bag across the counter. The clerk eyed the pouch, then glanced at Naomi. Something in her expression must have registered, because the woman's brows knit, but she said nothing. They moved Naomi through the fingerprint station. Ink rolled over her fingertips, pressed onto cards. No gloves, no greeting, just the mechanical steps of the process. "Name?" the clerk asked out of routine. "Dr. Naomi Carter," Naomi replied, her tone steady. The clerk typed it in. The monitor flickered, then displayed a bold red message. "Access denied. Federal Level 4 clearance. Do not pursue." The clerk frowned. Tried again. Same result. Reddick stepped closer. "What's the problem?" "System's locked," the clerk said. "I've never seen this before." Morales' eyes shifted toward Naomi. She didn't look surprised. Captain William Bill Harper appeared from a side hallway, coffee mug in hand. "What's going on?" The clerk turned the screen toward him. Harper studied it, then glanced at Naomi. For a brief second, their eyes met. He didn't ask her anything, just said to Reddick, "Process her manually." They led her down a narrow hallway lined with cinder-block walls. The echo of their steps followed them until they reached a holding cell. Bare, no cot, just a bench bolted to the wall. Morales unlocked the door. Naomi stepped inside without hesitation. The lock clicked shut. She sat on the bench, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Outside, Reddick muttered something to Morales about getting the paperwork done fast. Morales nodded, but his gaze lingered on Naomi through the small wired glass window in the door. Inside, Naomi exhaled slowly, her eyes on the far wall, as if seeing something far beyond it. They thought they'd broken her. She hadn't even started. Officer Mark Reddick walked ahead through the narrow hallway of Precinct 7, his heavy boots striking the tile like punctuation marks. Behind him, Evan Morales trailed a step slower, the evidence bag swinging from his hand. Inside, the pouch sat like a quiet accusation, its white powder catching the light each time it shifted. The station smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Phones rang in the background, the low murmur of voices drifted from the bullpen. Most officers barely glanced up. Arrests happened every day here, but a few pairs of eyes lingered on Naomi Carter as she was led toward processing. Something about the way she walked, upright, steady, as if her wrists weren't bound, didn't match the usual shuffle of the newly arrested. They moved her into the small, windowless booking room. The air was cooler here, the hum of a vent filling the silence. Naomi stood still while the desk clerk processed her paperwork, each keystroke echoing in the quiet. "Name?" the clerk asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Dr. Naomi Carter," Naomi replied evenly. The clerk typed, frowned, typed again. A red warning splashed across the screen. "Access denied. Federal Level 4. Clearance. Do not pursue." "That's odd," the clerk muttered. Reddick stepped closer, irritation flaring. "What's the problem?" "Her record's locked," the clerk said. "Not just sealed, federal locked. I've never seen this code before." Morales leaned in to look, his brow furrowing. "Level 4 clearance?" he asked quietly. Naomi said nothing, only held Morales's gaze for a second longer than necessary. The moment was broken when Captain William Bill Harper stepped through the doorway, a mug of coffee in his hand and the scent of it trailing behind him. "Something I should know about?" The clerk turned the monitor toward him. Harper studied the screen, then shifted his eyes to Naomi. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Process her manually," Harper said finally, setting the mug down with a quiet thud. He didn't wait for a response before walking out, but Morales caught the subtle stiffness in his shoulders as he left. They took Naomi's fingerprints the old-fashioned way, ink pressed into each groove, rolled onto cards that would be filed away somewhere in the back. Then came the mug shot, the flash of the camera briefly lighting the room. Her expression didn't change. Not defiant, not defeated, just steady. When it was over, Reddick gripped her arm and steered her down a side hallway toward holding. They passed bulletin boards layered with memos and faded wanted posters, the smell of old paper and dust lingering. A fluorescent light flickered overhead. The holding cell they chose was bare. No cot, no sink, just 4 concrete walls and a steel bench. Morales unlocked the door. Naomi stepped inside, the cuffs removed with a curt tug. She flexed her wrists once, then sat on the bench, her back straight, hands resting in her lap. The door clanged shut. Reddick lingered just long enough to mutter, "Enjoy the view," before heading back toward the main desk. Morales stayed behind. Through the wired glass, he watched Naomi sit there in absolute stillness. Most people paced, cursed, shouted. She didn't move. Didn't blink much either. It was unsettling. Half an hour later, the door to the block buzzed open, and another officer escorted in a woman in her late 50s. Her hair was tangled, streaked with gray, her skin weathered by years of hard living. She clutched her elbows, eyes darting until they landed on Naomi. The woman froze mid-step. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. "No way," she whispered. Naomi looked up, her face still composed, but her eyes focused. "It's you," the woman said, voice trembling. She stepped closer, almost forgetting the officer at her side. "It's really you." Naomi didn't answer. "Kandahar, 2010. My daughter, Mariah. She was 16. You carried her across the checkpoint when—" Her voice cracked, the memory filling in what words couldn't. For a moment, the holding cell dissolved around them. There was only the echo of a hot desert night, the weight of a wounded child, the smell of dust and smoke. "I never forgot your face," the woman said, tears welling. "They told me you were just some soldier, but I knew. Naomi's gaze softened, the faintest crease at the corners of her eyes. She didn't smile, but she nodded once, slow and deliberate. The officer cleared his throat and guided the woman, Gloria Jenkins, into the cell across from Naomi's. She sat on her bench, still watching Naomi like someone trying to hold on to a ghost. In the hallway, Morales stood in front of the security monitor, watching the feed from both cells. He'd seen plenty of reunions in this job, most of them bitter, angry. This one was different. He replayed the moment Gloria recognized Naomi, the way Naomi's expression had shifted, not to fear or embarrassment, but to something closer to memory and respect. Behind him, Harper's voice broke the silence. "You see that?" Morales turned, startled. "Yeah, she knows her." Harper sipped his coffee, eyes still on the monitor. "Not just knows her, owes her." Morales waited for him to say more, but Harper just set the mug down and walked away. In the bullpen, Reddick was already talking loudly about cleaning up the streets and making an example. His laughter carried, but it didn't touch Morales the same way it used to. Back in the holding block, Naomi sat exactly where she'd been, hands folded neatly, her gaze steady on the far wall. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. Morales glanced at the monitor one more time before turning down the volume on his desk phone. In his pocket, his own phone buzzed, a notification from Sophie's live stream. The replay showed Naomi's arrest from 3 different angles now, shared and reshared. Comments scrolled. "This is a setup. She didn't touch that bag. I know her from somewhere." Morales locked the screen quickly, but not before catching one last freeze frame. Naomi looking straight into Sophie's camera, eyes calm, almost deliberate. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Daniel Brooks walked into the small interview room with a folder tucked under one arm and the look of a man who had already decided the ending. His suit was a little rumpled, his tie loose like it had been adjusted and readjusted on the walk from the parking lot. He didn't offer a handshake, just pulled out the chair across from Naomi Carter and sat down. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air. A single overhead light buzzed softly. Naomi sat at the metal table, wrists free but resting neatly in front of her, posture straight. The faint shadow of the cuff still marked her skin. Brooks opened the folder with a flat snap. "All right," he said, tone brisk. "I've looked over the case. Here's where we're at. The DA is offering probation. No jail time. You plead out. You walk out of here today." Naomi's gaze was steady. "No." Brooks blinked, pen hovering over a legal pad. "I'm sorry? I'm not signing anything. I want a trial. And I want cameras." Brooks let out a short laugh that held no humor. "That's suicide in Ashton Falls County. You think a jury here is going to side with you? They saw the drugs come out of your bag." Naomi didn't flinch. They saw what they were meant to see. He leaned back, studying her. "Look, I've been doing this long enough to know when a client's about to make a mistake. This," he gestured to the folder, "is the smart move. You take it, you go home." "I didn't come here to go home quietly," Naomi said. Brooks frowned, tapping his pen against the pad. "You do understand how serious this is? This isn't some campus protest gone wrong. This is felony possession with intent. They'll bury you." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "They've been burying people for years. I'm just not one of them." That stopped him. For the first time since he sat down, Brooks really looked at her. Something in her tone, low, certain, made his pen still. "You still have a choice," Naomi said, her voice quieter now. "Show up for their system, or stand up in it." Brooks's jaw tightened. He closed the folder without writing a word. "I'll think about it," he said, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. Outside the interview room, Captain Harper sat at his desk, a half-empty mug of coffee at his elbow. The screen in front of him glowed with a search result. Patterson Jerome, arrest 2018, narcotics possession. He scrolled through the report, jaw tightening at the words, evidence recovered from jacket pocket during search by Officer Mark Reddick. The body cam footage attached was grainy, inconclusive. But Harper remembered the case. Remembered the kid's wide eyes, the way he swore the drugs weren't his. He tried another name, Vargas Tina, arrest 2019, distribution. Different location, same arresting officers, same pattern. Harper sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. The pattern was there. He just hadn't wanted to see it. In the bullpen, Morales sat at his desk, flipping through paperwork he wasn't really reading. The sound of Reddick's laughter carried from the break room. "Brooks is in there now," Reddick was saying to someone. "Bet you she takes the deal. They all do." Morales kept his eyes down, pen tapping against the desk. He thought about the live stream, the way Naomi had looked at Sophie's camera, about Gloria Jenkins recognizing her, about that database lockout. He didn't know what game was being played, but it didn't feel like one Naomi Carter was losing. That evening, rain streaked the tall windows of Harper's office. The captain sat in the dim light, the only sound the soft patter on glass and the low hum of the building settling. On his desk lay a stack of printed reports, every arrest in the last 2 years by Reddick and Morales. 14 cases, 12 thrown out for insufficient evidence, all defendants black or Hispanic, all charges narcotics-related. Harper flipped the last file closed and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "It's Harper," he said when the line clicked. "We might have a problem." Back in her cell, Naomi sat on the bench, eyes closed, her breathing steady. She could hear the muted voices outside, officers coming and going, the clatter of boots on tile. Somewhere, a door opened and footsteps approached. Morales appeared at the bars, keys in hand. "Your lawyer's gone," he said, voice neutral. Naomi opened her eyes. "And?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "You're different from the people we usually bring in." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Different how?" Morales didn't answer right away. "Most people, they're scared or angry. You're just waiting." Naomi didn't respond, but the faintest trace of something, amusement, touched her eyes. Morales stepped back. "Court's tomorrow. Guess we'll see if you're still this calm." Naomi's gaze followed him until he disappeared down the hallway. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to its marble columns and wood-paneled walls. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the floor. The buzz inside the Ashton Falls County Courthouse wasn't loud. It was the quiet, charged kind, like everyone was waiting for a storm that hadn't arrived yet. In the prosecution's row, Officer Mark Reddick sat back in his chair, arms folded, a half-smirk on his face. Beside him, Evan Morales tapped a pen against his knee, eyes fixed on the entrance. At the far end of the table, District Attorney Frank Devereaux straightened his tie, glancing up at Judge Karen Stillwell with the air of a man confident in his win. "This'll be over before coffee," Reddick muttered. Morales didn't answer. He kept his gaze on the courtroom doors. When Naomi Carter entered, she wore the same navy blazer she'd had on 2 days earlier in the lecture hall. No makeup to soften her expression. No visible jewelry except a plain watch on her wrist. She walked to the defense table without hurry, without hesitation. The bailiff gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her hands resting lightly on the back of the chair. Dr. Carter, Judge Stillwell began, peering over her glasses, you've declined the plea deal. Are you prepared to represent yourself in full court? Before Naomi could speak, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a low creak. Heads turned. Daniel Brooks walked in, not with his usual weary slump, but with a measured, deliberate pace. He didn't carry a briefcase this time, only a thick folder marked with a red seal. "I'll be representing Dr. Carter," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the back row. The judge's brow rose. "Mr. Brooks, I thought you recused yourself." "I did." Brooks approached the bench and laid the folder in front of her. "And I'm back, with federal authorization to present this." Devereaux was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "I'll decide what's irregular, Mr. Devereaux," Stillwell snapped, breaking the seal. She flipped through the first few pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to something sharper. She read slower the second time, her fingers tightening on the paper. The room seemed to shrink around her. Conversations in the gallery died away. Every creak of the benches sounded loud. Finally, she looked up at Naomi. "Is this true?" Naomi stepped forward, her voice calm and unhurried. "My name is Dr. Naomi Carter. I am the current director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." "You could have heard a pin drop." Reddick blinked, his smirk collapsing. Morales straightened, as if jolted. Devereaux's pen slipped from his hand, clattering against the table. Naomi moved to the center of the courtroom, each step deliberate. "You didn't just arrest a civilian," she said. "You handcuffed a federal officer with Level 4 clearance, tampered with evidence, falsified reports, and obstructed an ongoing investigation into your own department." "That's a lie," Reddick snapped, half rising from his seat. "She's bluffing." "Sit down, Mr. Morales," Brooks said without looking at him, his tone firmer than anyone had heard from him before. From the back of the room, Captain Harper entered, his presence alone quieting what little noise remained. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was fixed squarely on Reddick. "I warned you," Naomi said, turning to face Reddick. "You'll wish this arrest never happened." The blood drained from Reddick's face. "I was following orders," he stammered. "From whom?" Naomi asked, her eyes shifting to Devereaux. The DA didn't answer. His jaw worked, but no sound came. Brooks faced the judge. "Your Honor, the charges against Dr. Carter are baseless, politically motivated, and obstructive to a classified federal operation investigating precinct corruption in Ashton Falls." Judge Stillwell's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white against the bench. "I'll need to—" "I've already sent the files to your secure server," Brooks said. From somewhere in the gallery, a whisper rose. "She's the FBI director." Another voice. "Oh my God, they tried to frame her." The murmurs spread, a ripple of disbelief turning into something heavier. Naomi turned toward the audience. "We're not done," she said quietly. "Today we begin talking about obstruction of justice, about who we protect and who we choose not to see." The judge called for a recess, her gavel striking like a starting gun. "Dr. Carter, you are to be released immediately and reinstated to your official capacity." The bailiff moved to unlock Naomi's cuffs. His hands hesitated, almost reverent, before the final click. Naomi turned to the rows of officers and attorneys who had dismissed her days earlier. Her gaze landed on Reddick and Morales, both standing too rigid, too pale. "Captain Harper," she said. The captain stepped forward. "You have jurisdiction," he told her quietly. Naomi glanced toward two uniformed officers by the exit, men she had already cleared through federal background checks before her arrest. "Cuff them." The officers moved. Reddick backed away instinctively. "Wait, hold on. This is a misunderstanding." His words broke off as the metal closed around his wrists. Morales didn't resist. The sound of the cuffs locking echoed in the room, a sound they both knew well. The gallery erupted, not in chaos, but in applause, gasps, even a few people standing. Sophie Grant, seated in the back, had tears in her eyes as she recorded. "You were never in control," Naomi said to Reddick as he passed. "You were just loud." Devereaux still sat frozen at the prosecution table, his hands trembling as he reached for a folder, then thought better of it. Naomi stepped to the bench. "With your permission, Your Honor, I'll be turning over all evidence of this precinct's misconduct to the Inspector General, including every case touched by these two men." Judge Stillwell nodded slowly. "Do what you must." The oversight chamber at the U.S. Department of Justice was colder than Naomi expected. Not the temperature, the atmosphere. The polished mahogany table stretched the length of the room, a mirror for the fluorescent lights above. Rows of American flags stood in silent formation behind her, the gold fringe catching the light. Naomi sat at one end, her hands folded neatly on the table. Brooks sat to her right, quiet but present. At the opposite end, Franklin Devereaux leaned back in his chair, the faintest smirk on his lips. He wore a dark suit with the confidence of someone who had won far more battles than he'd lost. Oversight officials and federal agents filled the seats along the sides. Notepads were open, pens ready. The air was taut, as if the walls themselves were listening. Naomi's voice was calm, steady. "Mr. Devereaux, in your 9 years as district attorney, you prosecuted 47 wrongful convictions. 43 of those defendants were people of color." Devereaux scoffed lightly. "We don't choose who breaks the law, Director Carter." "No," Naomi said, sliding a folder across the table. "But you chose who to silence." The folder landed with a quiet thud. Devereaux didn't reach for it, but one of the oversight members did. Inside were pages of case summaries, names, dates, charges, and the word dismissed stamped in cold black ink. Attached were photocopies of internal memos, their redacted sections still bleeding black. "These," Naomi continued, "are records of coerced testimonies, falsified evidence logs, and confidential memos your office tried to bury. You didn't just ignore misconduct, Mr. Devereaux. You orchestrated it." Devereaux's smile thinned. "You're reaching." Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she opened her briefcase and removed a USB drive. "Let's hear from someone you tried to erase." Brooks plugged it into the screen at the end of the room. A video filled the display, grainy but clear enough to show a man in his 50s, seated in a small living room. His voice was steady, but the lines on his face told a different story. "My name is Jerome Patterson," he began. "I was sentenced to 18 years for a robbery that never happened. The DA's office suppressed footage from a traffic camera that would have cleared me. I lost my wife. My kids grew up thinking I was a criminal." The room was silent except for Patterson's voice. "I wasn't perfect," he said, his voice catching, "but I wasn't a thief, and they knew that." Naomi let the video run its course. When it ended, she looked directly at Devereaux. "Jerome Patterson is just one. There are dozens, men and women who never stood a chance, not against your ambition." One of the oversight members, Judge Ortega, spoke up. "Do you have corroboration for these claims?" Before Naomi could answer, Brooks leaned forward. "Yes, I worked under Devereaux. I covered for him. I helped redact files and steer cases away from scrutiny. I said nothing. Until now." Devereaux's head snapped toward Brooks. "You little coward." "I was," Brooks admitted, meeting Naomi's eyes briefly before looking back at the panel. "But not anymore." The room shifted. The quiet was no longer passive. It was watchful. Devereaux stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a smear campaign. You can't—" "Sit down, Mr. Devereaux," one of the federal agents said, voice clipped. Naomi's tone didn't rise, but each word was a clean cut. "There's more. A full report has been submitted. If you require additional evidence, we can open sealed logs from the last 3 years." The head of the panel looked to Judge Ortega, who gave a single nod. "This warrants a full federal inquiry." Devereaux shook his head slowly, like someone watching the ground fall away beneath his feet. "You're making a mistake." Naomi leaned in slightly. "You didn't think it was a mistake when you let officers plant drugs on innocent people? But now that the mirror's pointed at you, suddenly it's unfair." She straightened. "You weren't enforcing the law, Mr. Devereaux. You were building an empire on the backs of the voiceless. The door opened, and 2 federal agents stepped inside. Devereaux backed up instinctively. "You'll hear from my lawyers," he barked. "We already have," one of the agents replied. They flanked him, guiding him toward the door. His gaze swept the room, but no one met his eyes. When the door closed behind him, Brooks let out a slow breath. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to Naomi, "for not speaking up sooner." Naomi gave a single nod. Speaking now still matters. From the far end of the table, Judge Ortega said, "Director Carter, this task force you proposed, if approved, it will have broad authority to reopen cases. Are you prepared for the scale of that responsibility?" Naomi's gaze was unwavering. "I am." Outside, the hallway was already thick with reporters. Word had spread the moment Devereaux's escort reached the lobby. Cameras flashed, questions shouted, microphones angled toward Naomi as she and Brooks emerged. She didn't answer any of them. Not here, not yet. The story wasn't finished. Liberty Green hadn't looked like this in years. The park at the center of Ashton Falls was usually a quiet cut of lawn and stone paths, the kind of place where retirees fed squirrels and joggers passed without looking up. But tonight, the grass was dotted with people, families, students, veterans, church groups, each holding a single candle against the cool October air. The flicker of flame moved like a living thing in the darkness. A small stage had been set up at the far end, framed by 2 American flags. Behind it, the courthouse clock tower glowed faintly under floodlights. The crowd murmured in low tones, a ripple of anticipation running through them as a black SUV rolled up behind the stage. Naomi Carter stepped out first, her navy coat buttoned against the night air. Brooks followed, carrying a slim folder under his arm. Captain Harper was there too, standing off to one side with his hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the crowd. When Naomi stepped up to the podium, the murmurs faded. The candle's glow reflected in dozens of eyes turned toward her. "For days," she began, her voice steady but carrying in the crisp night, "I said nothing." She let the words settle. A breeze stirred, the flags shifting behind her. "I let them shout. I let them accuse, because sometimes they need to hear themselves echo." Her gaze moved across the crowd. "Silence can be a shield, and sometimes silence is the most powerful truth we have." A few heads nodded. Somewhere in the middle rows, Sophie Grant held her phone high, streaming live again. "But tonight," Naomi continued, "I'm speaking, not just for myself, but for every voice they buried, every name they crossed off, every file they sealed." She opened the folder in front of her, and Brooks stepped forward to adjust the microphone. 12 formal investigations are now active into misconduct, fabrication, and systemic targeting. We have reopened 300 case files across 4 counties, and we are just getting started. Gasps swept through the crowd. Some people clutched their candles tighter. Others turned to the person next to them in disbelief. "Justice isn't loud," Naomi said. "It doesn't always kick in doors or shout over the noise. Sometimes it walks in with proof in one hand and patience in the other." Behind her, a large monitor began cycling through black and white mugshots, faces young and old, each one representing a life altered by wrongful conviction. A boy, only 17 when sentenced. A grandmother pulled over on her way home from church. The images moved slowly, each one staying long enough for the crowd to take in. Naomi looked toward them. "Some of you will ask why I didn't reveal myself sooner. The truth is, shadows gave me the cover I needed to shine a light that couldn't be ignored." From the front row, Gloria Jenkins held her candle with both hands. The flame trembled in the breeze, but it didn't go out. Next to her, a little girl, Mariah, watched Naomi with wide eyes. "This isn't about one courtroom," Naomi said. "It's about every place where justice was supposed to live and instead chose convenience. That ends now." She closed the folder and stepped back from the podium. The crowd stayed silent for a beat, then a wave of applause rolled forward. Not loud and chaotic, but deep and steady, like something grounded. The next morning, the news ran the footage of her speech on every major network. Commentators called it the candlelight address. Hashtags trended. Old cases were pulled from dusty file rooms. And for the first time in a long time, people who'd stopped believing in the system began to wonder if it could change. Later that afternoon, Naomi stood in her new office at the DOJ. The walls were still bare, the desk clear except for a stack of pending files and a single framed photograph wrapped in an old, soft cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, her mother in uniform, standing in front of a courthouse in Alabama, the same courthouse that had once turned her away because of the color of her skin. Naomi crossed to the wall behind her desk and hung the photo with care. She stepped back, taking it in. "Justice," she whispered. Outside her window, a small group had gathered, not to protest, but to hold candles in the daylight. They didn't chant, they didn't shout. They just stood there, the flames steady, a quiet presence. Naomi watched them for a moment, her expression unreadable, then turned back to her desk. She reached for the first file on the stack. The work was only beginning. In the quiet after the last gavel fell, the image that lingered was not of flashing cameras or raised voices, but of candlelight swaying in the cool night air. Faces young and old stood shoulder to shoulder, the glow reflecting in their eyes, as if the whole town had decided together to breathe a little deeper. For some in the Black community, it was the first time in years they'd felt the system might actually hear them. For others, it was a reminder of long-fought battles and the strength it takes to keep standing when the wind is against you. The heart of Naomi Carter's journey wasn't in the reveal of her title or the arrests made in the courtroom. It was in the way she held her dignity through every twist, showing that stillness can be stronger than shouting, and patience can outlast power. She proved that in the face of false judgment, you can stand firm, not only to reclaim your own truth, but to open doors for others, especially in the Black community, who've been told for too long to wait their turn. In life, as in her story, it's not the loudest in the room who change it. It's the ones who stand unshaken, even when every eye is watching. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Hold on to your dignity and stand for the truth with calm resolve. Justice isn't always swift, and it's rarely perfect, but it grows in the space where courage meets compassion. Like a lamp quietly glowing in a window on a dark street, one steady act of integrity can guide us, and those who follow, through the longest nights. And for the Black community, and for anyone who's been underestimated, that light is more than hope. It's proof that change can come from the most unexpected places. So perhaps we can each ask ourselves, in the small moments as well as the large, when the time comes to speak, will we do it with the strength of someone who has listened first? And when the time comes to listen, will we do it with the respect of someone who knows the weight of another's silence? Take a moment, even now, to think about the people in your own life who carry their battles quietly, who stand in rooms where they are doubted and still choose to stand tall. If this story has stirred something in you, consider passing its warmth along, to a neighbor, to a friend, to someone who needs to know they are seen. Change, after all, rarely begins with a crowd. More often, it begins with a single person deciding to stand, and the rest of us deciding to stand with them.